Imagine the most powerful civilization in human history, at the absolute height of its glory. Its roads stretch from the Scottish Highlands to the edge of the Arabian Desert. Its armies have never been more disciplined, its cities never more magnificent, its philosophers never more celebrated. For the first time in its 800-year history, Rome is being governed by a chain of emperors so wise, so capable, so genuinely beloved, that the great historian Edward Gibbon would one day call their era. And I want you to remember this phrase: the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous. This is Rome at its peak. This is the empire at its most invincible. And then a soldier coughs. To understand what the Antonine Plague destroyed, you first have to understand what Rome had become. By the year 160 AD, the Roman Empire is home to somewhere between 60 and 80 million people, roughly a quarter of the entire human population of Earth. It is not merely a powerful state. It is an idea, a civilization so deeply embedded into the fabric of daily life across 3 continents that most of its subjects cannot imagine a world without it. Merchants in Alexandria trade silks that traveled overland from China. Fishermen in Britannia pay taxes that fund legions stationed on the Danube. A Greek philosopher in Athens can walk into a Roman courthouse and receive the same legal protections as a senator born in the shadow of the Capitoline Hill. This is the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of nearly 2 centuries in which the Mediterranean world has been largely free from catastrophic war, famine, or existential threat. And at the center of all of it sits a man named Marcus Aurelius. He is not the emperor Rome would have designed for itself. He is quiet where emperors are expected to be loud, thoughtful where they are expected to be decisive. He writes philosophy in a private journal he never intends to publish. Personal reflections on duty, mortality, and the transience of human achievement that would survive 2,000 years and eventually be read by astronauts, presidents, and prisoners alike. We know these writings today as the Meditations. Marcus Aurelius rules alongside his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, a more flamboyant, military-minded co-emperor who handles the empire's eastern campaigns while Marcus administers the enormous machinery of Roman government from Rome itself. Together, they represent the final chapter of what historians call the 5 Good Emperors, a succession of rulers stretching back to Nerva in 96 AD, each one competent, each one stable, each one passing the empire to a qualified successor rather than an incompetent biological heir. Rome has never had it better, and it will never have it this good again. The reason for that, the precise moment the arc begins to bend, starts not in Rome, not in a Senate chamber, not on a battlefield, but somewhere in the burning flatlands of Mesopotamia, in the ruins of a city Rome has just finished conquering. The year is 165 AD. Lucius Verus has been conducting a remarkably successful military campaign in the east, pushing back against the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival beyond the Euphrates, and systematically dismantling Parthian power across the region. His generals, particularly a brilliant commander named Avidius Cassius, have driven deep into Parthian territory and captured the ancient city of Seleucia on the Tigris. Seleucia is a prize, a rich, cosmopolitan trading city with a population in the hundreds of thousands. But what happens next depends on which ancient source you believe. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus writes that Roman soldiers, looting a temple of the god Apollo, broke open a sealed chest or a hidden chamber, and that something came out of it. Something invisible, something that spread through the Roman army camp, and then traveled back west with the returning legions like an uninvited passenger hidden in the folds of a soldier's cloak. Whether that account is literally accurate or a piece of later mythologizing, the timing is not in dispute. The plague emerges from the Eastern campaign. It follows the army home, and the Roman army in the 2nd century AD is the single most efficient distribution network in the known world. Think about what that means for a moment. Rome's legions are stationed from northern England to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. They rotate, they march, they receive reinforcements. They pass through cities, cross rivers on imperial ferries, eat in roadside taverns, sleep in way stations that serve 1,000 travelers a year. The same infrastructure that makes Rome's empire governable. The roads, the ports, the constant flow of soldiers and merchants and administrators. now becomes the mechanism by which something invisible and lethal is delivered to every corner of a civilization that has no concept of germ theory and no possible means of containment. The plague reaches Rome itself, the city, by around 166 AD. And what follows is unlike anything the Roman world has ever experienced. We know what the Antonine Plague looked like because a man was there to describe it, and that man was one of the greatest physicians in the history of medicine. His name was Galen of Pergamon. He was personal physician to Marcus Aurelius himself, a Greek doctor practicing at the absolute summit of Roman intellectual life, and he recorded the symptoms of this disease in clinical detail that still survives in his writings today. The disease began with fever. Then came inflammation of the throat. Then a black skin rash, covering the body in dark eruptions that Galen describes with an almost scientific precision. Patients experienced vomiting, diarrhea. Their eyes became inflamed. In some cases, the rash turned into open ulcers. Death, when it came, often came on the 9th day, or the 12th. Those who survived were sometimes marked for life, left with scarring or lasting damage to their senses. Galen is careful. He is methodical. But even he, the most sophisticated medical mind of his age, has no framework for what is happening. He understands that it spreads. He does not understand how. He can describe. He cannot cure. He can document the dying. He cannot stop them. Based on Galen's descriptions, modern medical historians have proposed that the Antonine Plague was most likely smallpox, or possibly measles, a disease that had existed somewhere in the world, perhaps in Asia or Africa, but had never before penetrated the relatively isolated biological environment of the Roman Mediterranean. The population of the empire had no prior immunity, no herd resistance, no natural defense built up through generations of exposure. The results were catastrophic. At the height of the outbreak, ancient sources tell us that 2,000 people were dying in the city of Rome alone every single day. Let that settle for a moment. 2,000 people per day in a single city for weeks on end. The historian Cassius Dio, writing about a later resurgence of the epidemic, describes carts collecting bodies from the streets. The infrastructure of Roman burial, of religious ceremony, of the entire social fabric surrounding death, it buckles under the weight of what is happening. The empire, at a conservative modern estimate, loses somewhere between 5 and 10 million people over the course of the outbreak's worst years. Some historians place the death toll significantly higher. The truth is we cannot know precisely, because Rome, for all its administrative sophistication, did not count deaths the way we count them today. What we can say with confidence is this: the Antonine Plague kills a meaningful percentage of the Roman Empire's total population within the span of a decade. And it does not confine itself to the poor, to the weak, to the margins of society. It kills an emperor. In the winter of 169 AD, Lucius Verus, co-emperor, military commander, the man who had launched the Eastern campaign that brought the plague home, dies. He is 38 years old. The exact circumstances are disputed by ancient sources. Some say he suffered a stroke during a journey through the Alps. Some hint at other causes. But the timing and the context place his death squarely within the shadow of the epidemic that his own army had unleashed upon the empire. Whether the plague killed him directly or whether it killed him through the cascading crises it created, the military overextension, the frontier instability, the logistical nightmares of governing a sick empire, the result is the same. Marcus Aurelius is now sole emperor, and the problems he inherits are unlike anything any Roman ruler has faced in 200 years. Here is something that is easy to overlook when studying this period. The Antonine Plague does not simply kill people. It kills specific people, and specificity matters enormously. The Roman army is one of the most heavily impacted institutions in the entire empire, because soldiers live and travel in exactly the conditions that maximize disease transmission. Close quarters, shared water, constant movement through infected regions. The legions that fought in the east come home carrying the plague, and then they spread it through every garrison, every frontier camp, every military installation along Rome's vast borders. And those borders, in the late 160s and early 170s AD, are under genuine pressure for the first time in generations. The Germanic tribes north of the Danube, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Iazyges, have been building pressure along Rome's frontier for years. Under normal circumstances, the Roman military machine would handle this with the kind of methodical, overwhelming force that had beaten back threats like this a dozen times before. But the Roman military machine in 168 to 169 AD is sick, undermanned, and grieving. Marcus Aurelius is forced to take emergency measures that Rome has not needed in living memory. He recruits gladiators into the legions, men trained to kill for entertainment, not soldiers, not professionals in the Roman military tradition. He arms slaves. He enlists Germanic tribesmen to fight alongside Roman units. A decision with profound long-term consequences for the cultural integrity of the Roman army that won't fully manifest for another century, but that represents a seismic shift in what a Roman soldier actually means. He melts down imperial treasures to fund the war effort. Statues, decorations, gold and silver objects from the imperial palace itself, auctioned off in the form of Trajan to pay for legions that are dying as fast as they can be recruited. And through all of it, the campaigns, the financial crisis, the funerals, the plague deaths in his own household, Marcus Aurelius writes in his private journal, not about victory, not about glory, about how to endure, about how to serve something larger than yourself, even when that something is crumbling in your hands. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. He is one of the most powerful men who has ever lived, and he knows, with the clear-eyed honesty that defines every page of the Meditations, that he is watching something irreversible happen. He does not pretend otherwise. He simply chooses to keep going. The Antonine Plague ends, or at least its worst phase passes, somewhere around 180 AD. But ends is a misleading word for what actually happens. The disease doesn't vanish. It retreats. It will resurge. A later outbreak in the 250s AD, possibly the same disease, possibly a different one, will be even more devastating and is called the Plague of Cyprian. The Roman world has, in a very real biological sense, changed permanently. Its population has declined. Its military capacity has been compromised. Its economic output has shrunk. But the most important legacy of the Antonine Plague is not what it destroys directly. It's what it initiates. Marcus Aurelius dies in 180 AD, still on campaign, still fighting the Germanic wars, still governing, still writing. He dies as he lived, in service to an ideal. He is 58 years old. He has ruled for 19 years through crisis after crisis after crisis, and by sheer force of character and administrative genius, he has kept the empire not just intact but functional. And then he makes the one decision that historians have never fully forgiven him for. He passes the empire to his biological son. His son's name is Commodus. Everything that Marcus spent his reign holding together, Commodus begins to dismantle almost immediately. He is vain, erratic, increasingly delusional. He famously begins to believe himself a reincarnation of Hercules, appears in the gladiatorial arena to fight stage combats, and renames Rome after himself. He is assassinated in 192 AD, and his death triggers a civil war, the year of the five emperors, that shakes the foundations of imperial succession so severely that Rome never fully recovers its political stability. Could Marcus have chosen differently? Could he have found another adopted heir, as the five good emperors had done before him? Perhaps, but it is worth asking why he didn't. Why a man of such extraordinary wisdom, a man who understood human nature, who understood the dangers of dynastic vanity, who had watched the results of bad imperial succession play out in Roman history, why did he choose as he did? Some historians suggest the answer lies in the plague. Marcus lost children to the epidemic. His family was devastated by it. His court was devastated by it. He may have been operating from a place of grief, of dynastic anxiety, of the desperate human instinct to see something of yourself survive a world that keeps taking things from you. The plague did not just kill Romans. It broke the psychological clarity of a philosopher king at the worst possible moment. In the century that follows the Antonine Plague, Rome enters what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. A 50-year period of near-continuous civil war, economic collapse, military disaster, and political chaos so severe that the empire very nearly ceases to exist as a unified entity. Dozens of emperors rise and fall, some lasting only weeks. The frontiers are breached repeatedly. Inflation spirals out of control. Cities that have been thriving centers of Roman civilization decline into shadows of themselves. The Antonine Plague did not cause all of this directly. History is never that simple, but it accelerated every underlying vulnerability the empire already had. The financial strain of replacing plague-decimated populations, the military weaknesses exposed at the frontier, the political instability that followed Commodus and his successors, the psychological shift in how Romans understood their empire, not as eternal, not as invincible, but as something that could get sick, something that could suffer, something that could die. That is perhaps the plague's most devastating legacy, not the bodies it put in the ground, but the certainty it put in the grave. The certainty that Rome was forever. When Edward Gibbon sat down in the 18th century to write the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the greatest work of historical narrative ever produced in the English language, he chose to begin his account of Rome's long unraveling with the reign of the 5 good emperors, with the Antonine Age, with that period he described as the most prosperous in all of human history. He chose to begin there because he understood, as we do now, that every great unraveling has a moment of peak, a high water mark, a point at which everything that came before seems to have been building toward glory, and everything that comes after seems to be a long retreat from it. The Antonine Plague is that inflection point for Rome, not a sudden collapse, not a wall coming down or a city burning, just a soldier returning from a campaign in the east, carrying something home that no Roman sword had ever faced and no Roman general had ever planned for. Something invisible, something that didn't care about the legions or the roads or the philosophy or the law. And from that invisible thing, from that moment in a looted temple by the Tigris, or a supply camp in the Syrian desert, or a ship in the harbor of Brindisi, the greatest civilization the ancient world had ever produced begins, slowly, inexorably, the long journey toward its end. The echo of that cough would last 300 years. History has a way of reminding us that the most powerful forces are sometimes the smallest ones, that empires are not undone only by armies and betrayals and bad decisions made in marble halls, but sometimes by things so small they cannot be seen, so silent they make no sound. The Antonine Plague swept through Rome's golden age and left it changed in ways that no emperor, no philosopher, no military genius could fully repair. It is a story about the fragility hidden inside strength, about how the same connections that make a civilization great, the trade routes, the roads, the movement of people, can also carry the thing that unmakes it. It is, in ways that feel uncomfortably familiar, a very human story. If this kind of deep dive history is what you come here for, the forgotten turning points, the invisible forces, the moments history almost looked completely different, then subscribe because there are dozens more stories exactly like this one waiting to be told. Leave a comment below. Which Roman emperor do you think was the most underrated? I read every one. This has been a story of how one plague ended Rome's golden age. And I'll see you in the next chapter of history.